Hey everybody, welcome to week 4 in sociology. We're on chapter 3 now, which is our chapter on culture, which is a really important chapter, even though I think the reading is a little bit shorter than most of our other chapters, but but I want to give it our full attention because it's a really important topic in sociology and just, I think, for understanding, the way the world works. So, we're going to give culture our full attention. At some point this semester, we're going to have to combine a couple of chapters into a week because this is a delayed start class and we got to make up a little bit of time. But it's not going to be this week because, I don't want to gloss over culture too quickly. I think it's an important topic, so we're going to stick with it. Same with socialization next week. Next week, our chapter is going to be on socialization, and that's another topic that we don't want to gloss over real quickly. So we'll give that our full attention. After that, we might be able to combine a couple of chapters somewhere. But we'll get to that. We'll figure that part out. We are going to do another couple of crash course sociology videos. The feedback that you guys gave me on that this week was positive. For the most part, I think most of you really liked it. So I won't overdo it. Just 2 weeks in a row where we'll do these videos. Which means next week we'll probably do something a little bit different. I don't want to do the same thing every single week. So we'll switch it up a little bit, but we'll stick with the crash course sociology for this week. In this video, we are going to do 2 parts, right? It'll be 2 10-minute videos. So there's a chance for you to take a break in the middle if you need it. And just we got to do both those videos for her to cover all the things that are important for our reading. And for what we want to talk about. So some of the terminology is going to be a little bit different in the video versus in the textbook. Like in the textbook, we talked about ethnocentrism and contrasted it to cultural relativity. That was the key word, cultural relativity. In the video, they're going to contrast ethnocentrism with multiculturalism. It's basically the same idea, but the terminology is just a little bit different. So don't let that trip you up. When you see it in any kind of exams and quizzes that we have in our class, it'll show up as cultural relativity. That'll be the term for our purposes. But I think that's the only major difference. Other than that, we are going to move right ahead. I'm going to answer a few of the questions that you asked in the Ed Puzzle video last week. I promised you to ask me some questions. So we'll answer a few of those. We will punt on a couple of them. And also I want to talk about the research proposal. I moved the research proposal from week 3 to week 4. And then I'll move it again to week 5 next week. So it'll always be in whatever, our current weekly folder is, right? So it's due on the 22nd. So it'll be due at the end of next week. So it will show up in the week 5 folder once that opens up. And yeah, we've also got a discussion board this week, so I don't want to overdo the videos. But there's it's a short TED Talk that I think is good, and I think it's worth thinking about and writing about a little bit. So we'll do another discussion board on that. So now, without any further ado, let me try to briefly answer a couple of the questions that I saw in your responses from last week, and then we'll move right into our new content for this week on culture. So we had one student ask about quantitative versus qualitative methods. So I'll go over that real quick because I think that is it could be very helpful for you as you prepare your research proposal. Obviously, a couple of you have asked for my input on your research proposal ideas. I really encourage you to reach out to me with those questions. If we were in a live seated class, I would probably take a class day where we workshop some things, so I could kind of force you to share what you're thinking with me, and we could talk about it. So it's harder for me to do that. So I just have to encourage you to email me and let me know what you're thinking about doing as a research proposal, or at least what kind of topics you're interested in researching. And I can give you some suggestions from there, but that's beside the point. What we want to talk about now is quantitative versus qualitative methods, because that might help you get an idea for what you want to do for your project. So the quantitative side is focused on numbers and statistics, right? So the root word of quantitative is quantity, right? So you're really looking at numbers. It's usually focused on the macro level. It's not always the case, but quantitative methods do lend themselves to looking at big picture ideas, right? Just because you are looking at statistics, and so you can really look at population-wide trends. Generally speaking, and again, I'm speaking in generalizations. There's variations in this, but generally speaking, quantitative methods, the benefit of them is that they allow for generalization. There's something called the law of large numbers, and that's the idea that things tend to regress back to the mean, right, back to the average, right? So independent of any outside forces, things usually kind of end up in the middle, right? So think of flipping a coin. This was an activity we did in my methods class, I think in undergrad, where my professor had everybody in the class flip a coin 10 times, and we recorded our results. And for our individual results, some of us were 5 and 5, 4 and 6, pretty close to the middle, but we had some outliers in that group, right? We had some folks that got like 8 tails and 2 heads, or 7 heads and 3 tails. So some were kind of off the average, but when we added everybody's together, it was really close to 50-50, right? So when you're looking at just a 10 item sample of something that's totally random, it could kind of contrast wildly. But when you got to like, 150 item sample, it was much closer to the mean, to the average, to 50-50. So that's kind of the theory, the basis for quantitative methods. It's why we have like public opinion polling that shows 54% of Americans believe such and such, and you might be thinking, well, no one ever asked me, and I'm an American, so how do they know that? And it's because they're using this law of large numbers. If they sample enough people from enough different backgrounds, and they do it the right way, and they sample the right way, and then they can get a pretty accurate representation. Pretty accurate. It's not always. There's always a margin of error, right? You hear that. The methods that you usually see in quantitative analysis are secondary analysis, and that's where you're taking data from a third party. So you could just go to the census, or you could go to some other kind of public opinion polling, Pew Research Center. There's a ton of them, and I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. Pew, PPP, public policy polling. Now there's more. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank on them. But anyway, there's all sorts of organizations who do this for a living, who do this professionally. They do public opinion polling and just collect data from people, and then they collect a large enough sample and then generalize it to the wider population with some margin of error, right? So you can say, so whenever you see some kind of public opinion polls that says 60% of people will say this, there's always going to be some kind of margin of error, give or take 4%. And that, but anyway, secondary analysis is where you're pulling data from a third party, from another group that just already exists, and you're conducting your own analysis on that. And some great research has been done using secondary analysis. Another thing that you can do is structured survey. So you can collect your own data, and you just collect it in a quantitative ways. You want to make sure that whatever their answers are, they can be converted into numbers. So you'll see this, like you see it in your student evaluations when you're evaluating your classes at the end of the semester. Those are mostly quantitative methods, right? Because you're asking, this is what we call Likert scales, where someone asks you to rate your opinion on this 1 through 5, right? Whether it's that where you see strongly disagree, disagree, neither agree nor disagree, agree, strongly agree, right? You got that like 5-point scale. And so again, so as long as your answers can be converted into a data point, into a numerical data point, then you're dealing with a quantitative method, and that's something that you can then collect. As long as you're collecting enough samples, as long as you've got enough data, you can do some things that'll help generalize that to the larger population. So that's the idea behind quantitative methods. Qualitative methods are less focused on numbers and broad generalizations and more focused on detailed descriptions. So usually, again, it's not always the case, but usually it's focused on the micro level, individual interaction, right? And you're looking at describing these individual actions in vivid detail, as much detail as possible. The trickiest part about a lot of qualitative methods are not imputing emotion, right? You want to just kind of focus on actions and not in that moment try to say someone was angry. You try to describe someone as what they did, and then you can go back later and say, yeah, man, I think all that means he was angry. But again, you don't want to necessarily impute emotions. I'm kind of getting sidetracked there. The different methods of qualitative research include participant observation, unstructured interviews, and focus groups. And so these things can work together. So for an example, I'll go back to when I worked as a program evaluator for reentry programs, and we used mixed methods, which means we did some quantitative methods and we did some qualitative methods. And so at the quantitative level, we were definitely looking at like recidivism rates. We were trying to get across the few counties we were working in. We wanted to get an idea of who was participating in programs and whether the people who participated in those programs recidivated or were rearrested or reincarcerated at a higher rate or a lower rate than people who did not participate in those reentry programs. And so that was a quantitative analysis. We collected data. We said, hours of participation in a program, and we put that on one axis, and we put yes or no recidivated, yes or no as another one, and we just ran simple kind of statistical analysis that way. So that was a quantitative analysis, and that's just looking at, is this program meeting its goals of reducing recidivism? Are people who participate in these programs less likely to recidivate once they're released than people who don't participate in these programs? So that's the quantitative side. The qualitative side was where we actually get in, as we want to try to explain kind of how or why it did or did not work, or what the experience of the people who were in those reentry programs were like. So in addition to doing that quantitative analysis where we're just looking at measuring recidivism rates, we also wanted to interview the key people who took part in those programs. So we interviewed tons of inmates and detention center employees to talk about their experience with the reentry program. And again, in that situation, we were focused on the detailed descriptions, right? We were looking at what people were doing, how they were feeling, how they expressed themselves, and how they just how they felt about the program. And so you needed both. We needed both. We needed to do the quantitative analysis to see if it was meeting that overall main goal of reducing recidivism rates. That's a quantitative measure. But we also wanted to do some qualitative measurement so we could sort of understand why it was or was not working. So you need both. I hope that makes some sense. So we also want to talk about conflict theory and functionalism. Oops. All right, so another question had to do with conflict theory and functionalism, which I also thought was important to go over again, because again, we'll come back to this idea again and again all semester, so we want to make sure we kind of have this part down. So conflict theory and functionalism are two macro level theories, so we can contrast them, and they do kind of work neatly in a way that you can sort of compare and contrast. So with functionalism, remember that the key basis is that everything kind of works together. This is the organismic analogy, right? That society is like an organism. It all has different parts to play. Like all of us, all of our institutions have different parts to play to making society function and move and live and grow and do all the things that it does. So that's the key word. There is function, right? Everything serves some sort of function to the overall functioning of society. So the key ideas are social cohesion and shared values. That's what makes society happen, right? Everything works together because we have this society, right, where we have rules and we have norms. And because we have that social cohesion, because we feel this connection to our neighbors and our community, and because we have some shared values, about what's right and what's wrong, about what success looks like, what the right thing to do looks like, what working looks like, what all of this, because we have some shared values about life in general. That's what makes us have society, right? That's what makes us work as a collective and work together. Conflict theory, on the other hand, is much more negative. And it's interesting because functionalism comes from a place, or if you remember, functionalism comes from a place of sort of negativity about the actual essence of human nature, right? Like functionalism, or Durkheim anyway, said that without society, without these shared values, without this social cohesion, without our institutions, humanity would just kind of revert back to our base instincts, right? Our base animal instincts, and that our that connectivity, that feeling of connection with other people in society, is what keeps us from just being animals. In contrast, Marx saw our social patterns and social structures as being oppressive forces and things that kept us from exercising our full creative capacity. So the key basis for conflict theory is that power structures are exploitative. So that's the key. This power structures, conflict between social classes, and that occurs because of power differentials. So higher classes, more powerful classes, tend to remain in their higher classes from generation to generation through exploitation. And this is especially apparent in when we talk about economic class, or socioeconomic class, what we might call it. So that's like your real traditional upper class, middle class, working class, lower class. And the focus is on inequality. And particularly in the last half of the 20th century, conflict theorists were really focused on how social class reproduces itself over generations. It's one of the enduring questions. It's when you're born into a poor family, you're way more likely to grow up poor. And if you're born into a wealthy family, you're way more likely to remain wealthy. If you're born into a middle class, you're most likely going to stay middle class all your life. So the idea that there's this sort of social inertia, and we'll talk about that more we actually have a chapter on stratification where we'll talk about social inertia in a little more detail. But that's one of the key ideas that conflict theorists wrestled with, especially in the 70s and 80s. Anyway, but I get in key contrast to functionalism, conflict theory thinks that society happens. What makes society happen is the exploitation of the vulnerable, right? It's the fact that society would not work if we didn't have cheap migrant farm labor. The society would not happen if we didn't have people working in sweatshops in Bangladesh to make our clothes on the cheap. So that sort of the exploitation of the vulnerable is a linchpin for capitalist society. So we and of course, like, the truth is both, right? Yes, social cohesion and shared values are really important to making society function. And yes, exploitation of vulnerable people happens and contributes to our way of life, especially when we look at it on like a global level. When we live in the United States, I mean, a lot of people check the tags on your clothing. Almost none of your clothing was made in the United States. You're going to see China, you're going to see Bangladesh, you're going to see Indonesia. Anyway, chances are the shirt that you're wearing right now was made by a 14-year-old girl working 14 hours a day for $3 a day. No, just I don't know what to do with that information. It just kind of is. So anyway, there's conflict theory and functionalism in a nutshell. And again, I glossed over that idea with sweatshop labor and some of the inequality things that we are going to focus on a little bit more in later chapters. And we will also look at functionalist perspectives on those same topics. Again, one of the miracles of modern sociology is that you don't have to choose between these two. These are not mutually exclusive ideas. Conflict theory can help us understand some phenomena. Functionalism can help us understand some phenomena. Both of them working together can help us get a really full understanding of a given phenomenon. All right. I also had a question about ice cream and murder. So we wanted to focus, I want to spend just a minute on spurious relationships. So if you remember this, ice cream sales spike at the same time as murder rates do. And that's really, it's a fun one. It's not even I remember when I was a sociology student, the example they used was ice cream sales and drowning deaths. And the key thing is that like a lot of things might spike in the summer or with the season, right? So it's not that ice cream sales are causing people to drown or causing people to get murdered. It's just that all of those things tend to spike at the same time of year. There's another variable in there, the heat of the summer, that's really probably doing most of the work there. So that's so the ice cream murder thing, that was just an example of a spurious relationship where there is a correlation, but it doesn't imply causation. So this is what a correlation looks like on a graph, right? So if you look at this variable over here, you would say like drowning deaths, right? And then over here you'd say like ice cream sales or murders, ice cream sales. And you would see that in the same time that as murder rates are going up, so are ice cream sales, right? So higher ice cream sales, higher murder rates. And so you're seeing this is what we would call a positive correlation. There is a positive relationship between those two things. But just because you see this pattern doesn't necessarily mean one is causing the other. There was our ice cream murder situation. That was an example of a spurious relationship where there is a third variable that's really doing all the work there. All right. And this was a really good question about how to conduct value-free research, because again, I asked you for some ideas on that, and honestly, there's really no perfect way. Your biases as a researcher are going to sneak into your analysis. There's not much. There's just no way around it. So the way you can kind of control for that is to first off acknowledge your biases, write them down. We got to be honest with ourselves. Acknowledge them to yourself. If no one else, you don't necessarily need to write it out in your finding, but acknowledge to yourself what your biases are and what you would prefer to find, just so you are aware of that feeling within yourself and can monitor it. That's an important part of it. But even more important, the really important part is the rigorous methodology. Design a research plan, trust the process. If your findings don't jive with your biases, whatever, man. Those were your findings. So you stick to your methodology, you stick to your research design, you trust the process, and again, when you design your research, you're going to design your research in a way that tries to control for your biases, right? And quantitative analysis is great for that, right? Like I wanted my reentry programs, I wanted them to reduce recidivism. I really wanted to find a pattern there, right? I wanted to be able to demonstrate that these reentry programs are great for the counties. You should continue funding them. They're doing the things that you want to do. But the results were the results. That's that, right? So you just stick to the methodology, which is especially kind of easy in quantitative analysis when you're just looking at statistics and numbers. You can really just focus on that statistical analysis or the results of your survey questions. And again, when you're sticking to the methodology, when you're designing your research, if you're designing a survey, you want to make sure you are monitoring bias in the questions, right? Because the way you ask a question can certainly bias the responses. And so again, we're talking about peer review. You want to have multiple people review your survey questions, and double check them and see if they think they are worded in an appropriate and neutral manner. But the truth is, I'm probably coming from a camp where there's really no such thing as true, complete value-free research. But there are lots of ways we can mitigate the effect of our own values and our own biases in our research. And finally, coming soon. So we've got a couple more things that I want to spend some more time with. I had one student ask me to talk a little bit more about Jane Addams. She's awesome. So you know what? I think we're going to find a way to do that within our text, within our curriculum this semester. So I'll try to prepare some more information about Jane Addams. But she's super cool, man. She was real active in the late 19th century, early 20th century. She hung out with Teddy Roosevelt and sort of invented the field of social work. And it was just in an era when it was absolutely needed the most, right? I mean, when we didn't have labor laws, we didn't have anything to we were still, our cities were still catching up to the needs of the population boom that came to cities with the Industrial Revolution. We're still catching up to that population boom as far as installing infrastructure and institutions like education and sanitation, right? So there was just, man, there were a lot of people in really bad ways, and Jane Addams established a new institution within the United States that exists to help folks out. She's great. So yeah, we will definitely spend some time talking about Jane Addams later in the semester. And then there were also two really profound questions that I think I'm just going to kind of open up to you guys. First off, to what degree does our background, ethnicity affect our lives? And of course, there's no one answer to that. And again, sometimes these debates about degrees are a bit of a distraction, right? Our background, our ethnicity, it does affect our lives, and it's enough to say that it does. So we just analyze how it does. But like when you're trying to put like a degree on it, how much versus it's going to be so different for everybody. There's going to be so much variation in that from person to person that it's almost not even worth thinking about to what degree we're talking about. But if we just shift that question a little bit to how does our background, ethnicity affect our lives, then we're really into some nice sociological terrain where we can really honestly, we can design some research. We can design some research around that question and try to figure it out. And then finally, this one, how can we take other people's views into consideration, but at the same time express ourselves without hurting other people? I love this question. It's about empathy. It's about sticking to your own value systems and beliefs, while at the same time empathizing with other people. And I think, honestly, to the person who wrote this question, the fact that you're asking that question, I think you're off to a great start. I think just the fact that you have the desire to do that is going to go a long way. But I'll ask a question here and maybe get some input from your classmates, and we'll share that. We'll talk about it more next week. All right, that's what I got. So this video has gone longer than I wanted it to. So we're going to end up doing this in two separate things. So we're going to have this video where we do the questions, and then we're going to have the other video, which is just going to be the two Crash Course Sociology videos. So that's how it's going to end up shaken down. Remember your research proposal. Remember to email me your thoughts, your ideas, get some feedback. Let's have a conversation about it. We'll reply back and forth with some emails, and we'll talk about it. We'll figure out some things. And it's going to help your grade, and B, it's just going to help you think through this process and get the most out of this activity that you can. So do it. Email me, reach out. Let me know what you're thinking about researching. Let me know what you're interested in, even if it's a method that you're more interested in than another method, or a subject that you're interested in, whatever it is. Let me know what you're thinking, and I'll be happy to give you some feedback. All right, that's what I got. Enjoy the next video, which is on Crash Course Sociology.